Zora Neale Hurston, the anthropologist who became a Hoodoo initiate in 1927, a Columbia anthropologist, went south to document Hoodoo and became the tradition's most important witness from within. Long before the word ethnography meant what it means today, before the practice of participant observation became standard methodology, before anthropology understood that documentation from outside a tradition could never capture what documentation from inside might reveal. Zora Neale Hurston drives a used car south from New York City, carrying a calibrated ruler for measuring skulls and a letter of introduction from Franz Boas. The year is 1927. She is headed home to Florida, to the Black communities where she grew up, to document the folklore and spiritual practices that academic anthropology has dismissed as primitive superstition. What she brings back will change everything about how American spiritual traditions are understood and documented. But first, she has to become something more than an observer. She has to become a practitioner. Hurston arrives in Eatonville, Florida, the all-Black town where she spent her childhood, with the credentials of Columbia University and the insider knowledge of someone who grew up hearing the stories she has been sent to collect. This combination makes her unique among anthropologists working in 1927. Other researchers come to Black communities as outsiders, as white academics studying what they perceive as curiosities, documenting practices they do not understand and cannot participate in. Hurston comes as both scientist and community member. She speaks the language, she knows the people, she understands the context in ways no outside observer ever could. And this understanding allows her to see something other researchers miss entirely. The folklore she has been sent to collect is not dead tradition preserved in stories. It is living practice, active and functional, woven through daily life in forms that range from harmless tales told for entertainment to deadly serious spiritual work that shapes the health, fortune, and survival of entire communities. The folklore collection begins simply enough. Hurston records the stories, songs, and sayings of Eatonville and the surrounding communities. She documents the tales of Brer Rabbit and High John the Conqueror. She writes down the work songs from the turpentine camps, the logging operations where Black workers labor in conditions that differ from enslavement only technically. She captures the verbal artistry of the lying sessions, the competitive storytelling gatherings where narrative skill determines social status. This is the material Franz Boas expects. This is standard folklore collection as anthropology practices it in 1927. But Hurston recognizes that beneath these surface traditions runs something deeper, something the academic establishment does not yet have vocabulary to discuss. The same communities that preserve these stories also preserve Hoodoo, the African-American conjure tradition that combines African spiritual knowledge with indigenous American herbalism and European folk magic into a system that has survived the Middle Passage and centuries of attempted suppression. And this system is not historical artifact. It is contemporary practice, as vital and necessary in 1927 as it was in 1827 or 1727. Hurston shifts her focus. She begins seeking out Hoodoo practitioners, the root workers and conjure doctors who maintain the tradition's technical knowledge. In Florida, she finds healers who prepare remedies from local plants, who diagnose spiritual causes for physical ailments, who perform workings to protect clients from harm or bring them luck in love, money, and legal troubles. She documents their techniques with scientific precision, recording exact ingredients, exact procedures, exact words. But documentation from outside has limits. The practitioners show her what they choose to show. They explain what they choose to explain. To truly understand the tradition, to document it with the completeness it deserves, she realizes she must do more than observe. She must participate. In 1928, Hurston travels to New Orleans. The city is the acknowledged capital of Hoodoo practice in America, the place where African, Caribbean, and American traditions blend most completely, where the legendary Marie Laveau codified the practices that spread throughout the South. Laval passed away decades earlier, but her successors maintain the tradition and Hurston seeks them out. She finds practitioners who agree to teach her, not as curious academic, but as apprentice. She undergoes initiation ceremonies. She learns to prepare hoodoo materials, the oils and powders and packets that form the physical components of spiritual work. She participates in workings as active practitioner rather than outside witness. This is not standard anthropological methodology. Franz Boas never suggested she should be initiated into the traditions she documents. But Hurston understands that certain knowledge can only be gained from inside, that the deepest understanding requires transformation of the researcher herself. The initiations vary by practitioner. Some are simple, ritual acknowledgements that Hurston is now student rather than stranger. Others are elaborate, multi-day ceremonies involving fasting, isolation, and ritual procedures that test commitment and open spiritual perception. Hurston documents all of it with the precision of trained scientist and the understanding of active participant. She records the exact words spoken during ceremonies. She notes the exact materials used in preparations. She describes the exact procedures followed in workings. The result is documentation of extraordinary specificity, the kind of record that can only be produced by someone who has done the work herself, who knows from direct experience what each step feels and means and accomplishes. The hoodoo tradition Hurston documents is not simple folk magic. It is sophisticated spiritual technology, a complete system for diagnosing and addressing problems through combination of herbal knowledge, ritual procedure, and spiritual force. A client comes to the practitioner with a problem, illness, bad luck, legal trouble, romantic difficulty. The practitioner diagnoses the spiritual cause, determines whether the problem stems from natural misfortune or deliberate harmful work by an enemy, and prescribes appropriate remedy. The remedies range from herbal baths to ritual procedures to the preparation of specific materials that the client carries or places in specific locations. The system is elaborate, internally consistent, and functionally effective within the worldview of the communities that use it. Hurston documents both healing work and harmful work. The tradition does not only help, it also harms. Practitioners perform workings intended to curse enemies, to cross targets, to deploy spiritual force against those who have caused injury. Hurston records these procedures with the same scientific precision she applies to healing work, without moral judgment, understanding that the tradition's ethics are the tradition's own and not the anthropologist's place to critique. She documents the ingredients used in crossing powders. She records the ritual words spoken to activate harmful workings. She describes the procedures for deploying these materials against specific targets. This documentation is controversial even within the communities she studies. Some knowledge is not meant to be shared. Some practices are not meant to be written down. But Hurston believes that complete documentation requires honesty about all aspects of the tradition, even the aspects that make outside observers uncomfortable. The fieldwork continues through 1931. Hurston travels between Florida and Louisiana, deepening her understanding, collecting more material, undergoing further training with multiple practitioners. Each teacher adds to her knowledge. Each initiation opens deeper understanding. By the time she finishes, she has become something unprecedented in American anthropology. A trained academic researcher who is also initiated hoodoo practitioner, someone who can document the tradition from inside with scientific precision and insider comprehension. Franz Boas understands what Hurston has accomplished. When Mules and Men is published in 1935, he writes the preface, explaining to academic readers why this book matters. Boas has spent his career fighting racist anthropology, the assumption that African and African American cultural practices are primitive and inferior. Hurston's work embodies his argument. Here is spiritual tradition of extraordinary sophistication, documented by trained anthropologist who is also community member, showing the complexity and functionality of practices that racist scholarship dismissed as superstition. The documentation proves what Boas has always argued. The problem is not the traditions being studied, but the limitations of the researchers studying them. The academic establishment largely ignores mules and men. The book falls out of print. Decades pass before the Black Arts movement of the 1970s rediscovers Hurston's work and recognizes its importance. Academic anthropology eventually acknowledges what should have been obvious in 1935. Mules and Men is the foundational document of American hoodoo documentation, the single most important record of the tradition produced by the only person who could have produced it with such completeness and precision. Hurston's methodology remains unique. Participant observation is now standard anthropological practice, but few researchers undergo the level of initiation and participation Hurston embraced. Few possess her combination of insider status and scientific training. Few produce documentation of comparable depth. Everything written about American hoodoo since 1935 builds on the foundation Hurston established. Every researcher who studies the tradition works in the archive she created. She went first into territory other anthropologists feared or dismissed. She went deepest into practices other researchers observed only from outside. And she brought back documentation that preserves a spiritual tradition in forms that allow it to be understood, respected, and continued. The hoodoo practitioners who taught Hurston have passed away. The specific communities she documented have changed. But the tradition continues, carried forward partly through the living transmission from practitioner to student and partly through the written record Hurston created. Mules and Men ensures that future generations can access the knowledge she gathered, can understand the tradition as she understood it, from inside, with the precision of science and the comprehension of participation. It is gift to the tradition she loved, documentation that honors rather than diminishes, that preserves rather than exploits, that serves the community rather than the career of the researcher. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.